you were asked by Attorney Lugo whether you had remained at the campsite from Monday night into Tuesday. Do you remember being asked that question?
I do.
Okay. And during that time period, was Jonathan Amerault's Subaru working?
No, it was not.
Where was it?
It was in the woods, like jammed into the woods.
Did you still have your cell phone on you?
Yes.
Did you have any cell coverage?
No, and the phone was dead completely.
Channel, and thanks for being here. So camping is usually a fun activity and a nice getaway, but in today's case, this couple went camping so that they could cover up a gruesome murder and dispose of any evidence of their crime. Unfortunately for them though, the couple would end up setting up camp in a spot where it was not allowed, and this would get them caught in the end. Jonathan Amerault was born in Rangeley, Maine on January 27, 1995, to Kenneth and Justine Amerault. John was an only child and he was raised in Milford, New Hampshire. He graduated from Milford High School, class of 2013, where he was captain of the indoor track, outdoor track, and cross-country teams. He then graduated with honors from Rochester Institute of Technology, class of 2018, with a Bachelor of Science degree in biomedical engineering. John loved spending time outdoors, whether it was hiking, snowmobiling, skiing, or riding his ATV. He was an active member of the region's hiking community and had climbed 66 of the region's 67 mountains over 4,000 feet, including all 48 in New Hampshire. John was also an avid sports lover, and he loved the Boston Bruins, the New England Patriots, the Boston Celtics, and, of course, the Boston Red Sox. He also loved going to see the Sox games. Additionally, John enjoyed volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club and was twice awarded the White House Youth Volunteer of the Year by both President Bush and President Obama. At the time that John was 25 years old, he was working as an engineer at Biomedical Manufacturing Engineer for Teleflex in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, and he had been working there for several years. In the summer of 2020, John had begun looking for a serious relationship, and a woman whom he worked with had recently caught his eye. Her name was Brittany Barron, and she worked as a production line worker at Teleflex. Brittany was currently in the process of getting a divorce from her husband, Armando Barron, but her and John had hit it off. And by early September, they were hanging out outside of work and messaging each other frequently. The relationship between them mostly consisted of Snapchat messages, talking during breaks at work, and seeing each other occasionally at after-work events. The pair had also shared 2 kisses. So John's new love interest, 33-year-old Brittany Barron, had been married to her husband Armando since they were teens. However, the pair had a very toxic relationship. And at the beginning of September 2020, Brittany had finally worked up the courage to tell her abusive and controlling husband that she no longer loved him and wanted a divorce. Armando and Brittany had 3 children together, and Armando was very much still in love with his wife and wasn't going to lose her. When she told him that she wanted a divorce, he screamed at her, "Are you serious?" and then slapped her. Then Armando grabbed her by the throat and choked her out until Brittany was unconscious. On September 20th, 2020, Justine Amerault reported her son John as missing after he had not replied to a few of her text messages for about a day. He also hadn't responded to several text messages from a very close friend or shown up at work. It was also noticed that Brittany hadn't shown up at work. She had then called her boss and told him that she was moving, so therefore she was quitting. After he was reported as missing, police went to conduct a welfare check at John's apartment in Keene. However, neither he or his car was anywhere to be found. Police then went to Brittany's house to follow up with her and see if she knew anything about John's whereabouts. She, however, wasn't there, so police spoke with her mother-in-law, whom she lived with, and the mother-in-law told them that Brittany had actually gone on a hike with some friends, and she was watching the children for her. So, not being able to reach her, police decided to return back the next day, on September 21st. This time, Armando's Jeep was in the driveway, and he was home, so investigators got to speak with him. He told police that he had dropped off his wife on Sunday morning at 2 o'clock in the woods near Temple Mountain so she could go hiking with some friends. Who the fuck goes hiking around 2 o'clock in the morning? He claimed that after dropping her off, he didn't want to go back to his house where his children were. So instead, he decided to drive all the way up to Amerault, New Hampshire, which is about 4 hours away from his house, so that makes 0 sense. Armando said he had then headed back home around 7 a.m. In order to follow up on the statements that police had been given by Armando, they decided they needed to speak with some of Brittany's friends. These friends would show police text messages sent by Brittany on September 20th, between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. She had texted some of her friends saying that she was quitting her job so that she could move to New Mexico and start over. She had also texted them saying that she was no longer going to see her own children, and additionally told her friends that she was no longer talking to either Jonathan or Armando. So investigators now had 2 missing people, Brittany and Jonathan. In an attempt to locate them, police decided to start tracking their phones. And their phone records showed that John and Brittany were moving together on September 19th and 20th, from about 11:40 p.m. to 1:53 a.m. At 1:53 a.m., John's cell phone had stopped communicating with cell phone towers. Brittany's cell phone, however, had stayed connected to the towers until 3:30 a.m., at which point she had then traveled to Amerault around 7:30 a.m. Just the day after police realized that Brittany was also missing, on September 22nd, a group of bear hunters came across her at a campsite, all the way up in Amerault, New Hampshire. The hunters had found her camping in a spot where it was not allowed, and it was close to a bear baiting site. They told her she was trespassing. But when Brittany refused to listen to the hunters' warnings and refused to leave, they contacted New Hampshire Fish and Game, and 2 conservation officers went out to find Brittany. When she was discovered, she did not immediately tell officers what had happened in the woods. She said she was only there to clear her head after she had a fight with a girlfriend during a party. But, along with Brittany, police would also find John's body in the woods, and his head was detached from it. They also found John's Subaru in the woods, covered up by a tarp. It wasn't until hours later at the Berlin Police Department that Brittany would finally start to tell them what had really happened. On September 19th, Armando had gone through Brittany's phone, and he discovered some Snapchat messages between her and John. This made him fly into a rage, and he said that Brittany was cheating on him, even though she had already told him more than a week prior that she didn't love him and wanted a divorce. Immediately after seeing these messages, Armando sent his 3 girls upstairs with his mother. He then brutally beat Brittany. Then he shoved his gun that he called Judge inside her mouth and told her she was going to die. But he didn't shoot her. Instead, Armando came up with a plan to get rid of Brittany's new lover. He then told his wife to get in their Jeep with him, and if she didn't, their 3 daughters were going to see something very nasty. So Brittany had complied with her husband's orders, and once they were in the Jeep, Armando took her phone and sent a text message to John. Pretending to be Brittany, he asked John to meet at a remote area at the Ringe Annett Wayside Park in Ringe, New Hampshire. During the drive there, Armando would read the messages out loud to Brittany and ask her questions about John. If he didn't like the answers he was given, he would hit her. On the way to Ringe, Armando ended up breaking Brittany's nose, and she was bleeding profusely. The couple arrived at the park around 11:40 p.m., and when they did, John was already there, waiting for who he thought was just Brittany. But Armando jumped out of his Jeep and surprised John. He then immediately began to attack him, punching him, kicking him, and even stomping on him, leaving shoe impressions on John's head. During this violent attack, Armando also tried to force Brittany to kill John. He put the gun in her hand and put his hand over hers, but she refused to pull the trigger. So instead, Armando demanded that his wife step on John's neck in order to strangle him. Brittany did as she was told, but when she felt John's body jerk, she jumped off. At that point, Armando decided that Brittany instead now needed to cut John's wrists to kill him. This also didn't work, and John was still alive. The entire time, he was begging for his life, and Armando was just mocking him. At one point during the night, Brittany and John were left alone inside of John's Subaru when John spotted a machete that Armando had left behind. He then began to plead with Brittany to use it to save themselves and kill Armando, but she refused. Brittany said to him, "You don't understand, man. I'm not going to kill him with that blow, and we're both going to die in this car." And then, before he could even say anything back to Brittany, it was too late. Armando jumped back inside the car. He then turned to John, who was sitting in the back seat, and said to him, "You know I'm going to let you live," but instead pointed the gun directly at him. John said, "Wait, I thought you were going to let me live." To which Armando replied back, "Well, I guess that makes both of us liars," and then shot him 3 times. John had then been thrown into the back of his own car. Following this, Armando then forced his wife to drive John's Subaru back to their home on Main Street in Jaffrey, with John still lying in the back seat, moaning, barely alive. So Brittany drove the Subaru back to their home, and Armando followed closely behind her in the Jeep. Once they got back to their house, they loaded up both cars with camping supplies. And when Brittany had gotten back into John's car afterwards, he was no longer moaning. He was silent. Now, while loading up the vehicles, Armando had actually taken the gun that he used to shoot John with and put it inside Brittany's backpack. So she now had a weapon to fight back against her captor, but she didn't. After leaving the house, Armando had Brittany follow him to yet another remote camping site, this time all the way up in Atkinson-Gilmanton Academy Grant in Coos County, which is about 200 miles north of their home in Jaffrey. And during this long drive, Armando made his wife speak to him the entire time on her cell phone. At one point, he even said to her, "Listen, I'm asking you all this now because once sunlight hits, I forgive you, like it's done." He went on to tell Brittany that he had decided to forgive her. Oh, forgive her? That's rich. He also told her that even after all of this, he was still in love with her. On their way up to the campsite, the pair had also stopped at a store in Amerault, New Hampshire, and they had purchased tarps, shovels, bleach, and other cleaning supplies. When they finally got to their destination, they drove the Subaru into the woods and then covered it up with a tarp. Then Armando made Brittany destroy any evidence, including John's ID and wallet. Armando then forced his wife to cut off John's head with a saw while he watched. He had told her that she needed to do this so that police were unable to find his dental records and identify the body. After this gruesome deed was done, they stayed the night at the campsite, and the next morning Armando left. But before he left, he gave Brittany a list of things that she needed to do in order to cover up their crime. This included burying John's body and head separately. He also left her with a gun for a second time, a 9mm, but again, Brittany didn't use it to defend herself or escape. Before he had left the campsite, Armando had told Brittany that he would be back for her on Friday, the 23rd, and she needed to make sure that everything he had given her to do was done before then. After Brittany had told investigators the gruesome details of what had happened to John, she went back with them to the campsite where it had happened. Here, she showed investigators evidence that implicated both her and Armando in John's murder. Also, Brittany showed investigators where she had thrown John's phone out the car window on their way up to the campsite, and they were able to recover it. Brittany spoke about how John had begged for his life on the night of September 19th. She said to investigators, "John, suffered so much before he died. Like by me, by Armando, it was so unnecessarily dragged out." On September 22nd, police were in contact with Armando, and they asked him to come down to the Jaffrey police station so that they could ask him some questions. However, instead, he had loaded up his pickup truck with concrete and bags of soil, got his oldest daughter, and then fled north. However, he was later arrested on September 25th after police had put out a bolo for him, a be on the lookout. Armando had then been taken into custody. He was charged and indicted with second-degree assault, criminal solicitation of first-degree assault, kidnapping, criminal solicitation of murder, first-degree murder, and capital murder. For his assault on his wife Brittany, Armando was additionally charged with second-degree assault, reckless conduct, and domestic violence. When police had found Brittany, she was in pretty bad shape. She had been found with bruising around her eyes, a broken nose, marks to her neck, and a chipped tooth. She, of course, was also arrested and charged with 3 counts of falsifying physical evidence. Her attorney, however, was arguing that his client had only acted out of fear of her husband and was under duress. Armando had made her cut off John's head while he watched. It was the ultimate show of control. But the district attorney believed that Brittany posed a significant threat to the general public. This was due to the facts surrounding John's murder, combined with the fact that Brittany had destroyed evidence and desecrated his corpse. Eventually, Brittany would be given a plea deal, and she would plead guilty to evidence tampering. As part of her plea deal, she was also required to pay for John's funeral costs, as well as counseling costs for his family. She was later sentenced to 3.5 to 7 years in prison. She also got 377 days credit for time served. And she was released on parole in early 2022. The family of Jonathan Amerault believed that Brittany deserved no leniency for her part in John's murder, and they expressed their disappointment in the plea deal that Brittany had been given. His family believed that she had multiple chances to get help for her and John, but she didn't.
I regret it every day, and I know that I have to live with what I've done for the rest of my life.
Brittany Barron says she now accepts complete responsibility for her actions around the death of Jonathan Amerault, with whom she had an affair. Officials say he was shot by Barron's husband at a Ringe Park in September of 2020, and that Barron and her husband drove the body to northern New Hampshire, where she committed what the parole board calls a heinous act.
I removed Jonathan Amerault's head because I was told that was what I had to do.
Barron's parole was vehemently opposed by Amerault's parents. They wrote a letter that was read by the victim's advocate, urging the parole board to keep Brittany in custody until after she has testified against her husband.
So if you think chances are low that someone capable of doing all that wouldn't simply just run before testifying next month, or simply go back on her word at his trial, please think again.
In granting parole, the board made it clear that Barron must fulfill her obligation to testify truthfully at her husband's trial. Brittany told the board she understands and that her actions over those days continue to haunt her.
Something that I continue to struggle with is forgiving yourself for the choices that you make and being able to own, just really accept that it happened.
Armando, however, would not get off as easy as Brittany had, and he would go to trial in May of 2022. And Brittany, who had just been released from jail, was set to testify against Armando during his trial. During the opening arguments, the defense pointed their finger at Brittany as the real killer, not merely just a victim of domestic violence, they claimed. They said that Brittany had been the one who shot and killed John, and that the wrong person was on trial. Armando's lawyer also told the jury that Brittany's testimony was likely to sound like a Lifetime movie, in which she is an abused wife. However, she has a very strong motive to lie, to stay out of prison. When Brittany did finally testify during the trial, there were contradictions found between what she said and the physical evidence. For instance, when Brittany had told police that she made weak attempts to stand on John's neck and slash his wrist when ordered to do so by her husband, an autopsy revealed that there had been significant pressure placed on both his neck and wrists. The slashes to the wrist had actually cut to the bone. Brittany had also described how Armando had shot the last bullet inside of the Subaru. She said he had turned around in the passenger seat with John in the back, his head against the window. However, the shot could not have been inflicted in this way, as the medical examiner found that it had been shot at a much closer range. But the Assistant Attorney General was putting the blame on Armando for John's murder. He showed the jury photos of Brittany Barron's bloodied and bruised face, X-ray images of John's skull showing the bullets lodged there, and Armando's police booking photo. Armando did not have any marks or scratches when he was arrested. The district attorney believed that Armando was jealous and he needed control of Brittany. It was all about his rage, and he had manipulated his wife into doing unspeakable things. When Brittany testified, she also spoke about how she and John had gotten to know each other a little bit better while working on a project in the days leading up to his death. and they had communicated via texting and social media apps. Brittany, however, said she would log out of these apps on her phone so that Armando would not see the messages, but that day she had forgotten. One afternoon, Brittany and John had even driven to a park after work. They had sat there and talked, and Brittany described him as kind, sweet, and funny. But she also said that she told John she could not offer him anything more than friendship, but later gave him a quick kiss before returning to work. So, mixed messages. When asked if she had wanted to start a relationship with John, Brittany said, "I thought there might have been potential, but I was not planning a relationship." Brittany also told the court that throughout the assaults on John, the attempted strangulation, the cutting of his wrists, he had never lost consciousness. She said that was the worst part of it all, that he was awake through all of it.
Message your little boyfriend.
Brittany Barone testified Wednesday about the plot her husband laid out in September of 2020 to lure Jonathan Amerault to a park. Armando Barone allegedly used her phone to message him.
At one point, he stomps on his face.
Brittany described a relentless assault when the 25-year-old engineer arrived, and then the moment Armando allegedly forces her to join in.
Kill him. Do it. Shoot him.
What did you tell him back?
No.
Did you say whether you could do this?
I was like, I can't. Yeah, I can't.
Brittany says he then ordered her to stand on his throat.
And I could hear John struggling, like he was trying to breathe.
Brittany says Amerault begged for his life and hers, promising to never talk or see her again. Armando, she says, was undeterred.
And John said, "What?" He said, "Look at her. Do you still think she's pretty?" And John looked at me. He says, "Yeah, I do."
Brittany says her husband forced John Amerault into the hatchback of his own car headfirst. John's last words were, "I thought you were going to let me live," before Armando shot Amerault 3 times.
And John says, "Wait, I thought you were going to let me live." And Armando said, "Yes, that means both of us liars."
Armando was ultimately found guilty on 13 of his charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and domestic violence against Brittany. The prosecution had previously agreed to drop his charge of capital murder. Armando Barron was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. While the murder conviction itself carries a life sentence, Armando was also sentenced to 45 to 135 years for his additional charges. The prison sentences are to be served consecutively. During the hearing, the judge also said to Armando, "The depravity of your actions in single-handedly causing the pain, suffering, and death of Jonathan Amerault show an extreme indifference to the value of human life. Your actions were brutal. They were absolutely horrific. They were selfish. They were completely senseless." Jonathan's mother, Justine, would also address the court, and she described her son as having a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart.
Your Honor, this verminous, conniving, murdering beast is lower than the excrement of filth. A creature not even worthy of a glance from me. A creature who lived like a leech, living in his mama's house, using his mama's telephone, his mama's husband's cars, living off his wife's job. And just look at him now, after committing a horrific murder, uttering not a word to defend himself. He leeches off the state of New Hampshire, using 2 more women to defend him and trying to put the blame on his wife. These are not the actions of a man. These are the actions of a coward and a pure leech. My son Jonathan was 1,000 times more of a man than this lowlife could ever even dream of being. My son Jonathan had a brilliant mind, a compassionate heart. He was gentle. He was devoted to his profession and was dedicated to doing work that would improve the lives of others. Jonathan was surrounded by hundreds of good and wholesome people, friends, family, classmates, professors, coworkers, all who loved him, respected him, and cherished him. The loss of Jonathan to this world is incredibly sad, but the saddest part of all is that in spite of him being surrounded by so many wonderful people, this evil creature just slithered right through us all and took him from us. And the last hours of Jonathan's beautiful life were in the company of this ugly, hideous, demented creature. Jonathan did not deserve to die, and he certainly didn't deserve to die in the company of this evil, hideous, demented creature. Jonathan had the most beautiful inner light. People recognize that in him. And they say that evil is attracted to people like Jonathan who have a beautiful inner light. And it's not so that evil can admire that beautiful light. Rather, evil seeks to destroy it. Evil recognized Jonathan's inner light, and evil tried to extinguish it. But there are some who bring a light so great to those around them that even after they have gone, the light remains. Rest in peace, Jonathan. Your light will never be extinguished. Your light remains with us. Whatever punishment Your Honor imposes in the sentencing today here on earth will pale in comparison to what this evil creature will face on the day he faces God, whom I believe will send him and his stench into the bowels of hell. Thank you.
Jonathan's father, Kenny Amerault, also addressed Armando, and he said to him, "You are a coward. You had to ambush and attack John with knives, a machete, and guns just to take him down. A wife beater. Disgusting, despicable. You mentioned to John you had a revolver called the Judge. Now we have another judge here today who will decide your miserable fortune." And a celebration of life was held for Jonathan Amerault on Saturday, October 3rd at the Milford High School track and field. About 9 months after his death, the Sohegan Valley Boys and Girls Club in Milford dedicated a granite bench in Jonathan's memory. Jonathan was completely blindsided. He was under the impression that he was going to meet up with his new love interest, as he had done in the past. But he was unknowingly being lured to his death. And could Brittany have stopped it all before it was too late for Jonathan? What do you think? Was Brittany properly punished because she was also a victim of Armando's rage and abuse? Or should she have gotten more time in jail because she didn't get help for John when she could have?